Hello, my name is Ed Scavarch. I am the County Extension Director for the University of Florida IFAS, located here on Pecos Road in Fort Pierce. Today we have Dr. Ronald D, who is the Interim Director and Professor at the Indian River Research and Education Center. Ron, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, good. I know it's been a while. You're a busy guy. We've been trying to get you in the studio, and finally we have the opportunity. So I'm really excited. You have been the interim director now for how long?
Almost a year. Started May 1 of last year.
So you have a lot of good historical data, I guess, that you could provide for us, some good history about the research station. So why don't we start there?
Sure. Well, the center actually got its beginning back in 1947, 70 years ago, when it was called the Indian River Field Laboratory. And Dr. Young, W.T. Young, from the citrus experiment station over in Lake Alfred, came over to do some research on citrus on 80 acres that was loaned, you might say, from St. Lucie County. And so he did his research there, and then a couple of resident faculty came on board in 1948. Then in 1949, the county leased on a long-term basis the 80 acres to the center, or the laboratory at that time, to do long-term research. And new faculty came on board, new faculty came, new faculty went. And then in 1951, another 720 acres was joined to the 80 acres, so that we now have somewhere between 780 and 800 acres there at the center, on which we have buildings and research plots. Then in 1960, they built a new laboratory, new offices, new greenhouses, all modern at that time in the 1960s, modern facilities, and that really allowed research and teaching and extension, the three mission points of the university, to take off. And then in 1975, the center became its own entity, because before that, all of the faculty were associated with either the Citrus Experiment Station in Lake Alfred or the Everglades Experiment Station in Belle Glade. But in 1975, it became its own entity, and the first director was Norman Hayslip. And it was followed up by David Calvert as center director, and after David Calvert was director, Calvin Arnold. And then in 1995, the center was renamed the Indian River Research and Education Center, because we do research there and we do education in the way of formal courses for UF students, but education also to the public on whatever aspect they need knowledge on.
So I heard stories back in the day that growers would fly their planes in and land them on what is now Rock Road and bring samples into the research station to have them analyzed by the scientists. You ever hear that?
I haven't heard that story, but it wouldn't surprise me, because Rock Road is certainly long enough to do that, and there was plenty of land at that time to be able to come in with a small plane and land it. And the center had the capabilities to do those soil analyses.
So your initial beginnings with the research station, though, was in biological control.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How you brought that emphasis into the area, and some of the work that you were doing there.
Well, the state of Florida is a hot spot for invasive plants and invasive insects. A lot of the invasive plants were brought in as ornamentals, but they escaped and then became pests themselves. Insects come in on infested material that escaped inspection, and when it gets brought in, it escapes to the wild and becomes an agricultural concern or attacking native fauna or flora. So recognizing that Florida also has had a long history of biological control, the use of natural enemies of beneficial insects to combat invasive plants and invasive insects. Several people with University of Florida thought it would be a good idea for the University of Florida to have its own quarantine facility. There is a quarantine facility up in Gainesville that UF people can use, but it's small and very crowded. So they thought we need our own University of Florida quarantine facility where we can bring in beneficial exotic insects, study them under controlled conditions, get to know them thoroughly before we have permission from USDA to release them into the wild. And these beneficial insects would be released to combat the invasive plants and the invasive insects. So a grant proposal was put together and sent to the state legislature, and in 2000 the state legislature awarded a very large grant to the Indian River Research and Education Center to build an entirely new biological control research and containment laboratory, part of that being a quarantine facility in which we can study these insects under controlled conditions, not allowing them to escape into the environment in case there's something we don't want them to be in the environment. And then in 2002, I joined the facility to be the lead scientist in the insect biological control program, and Dr. Bill Overholt joined at the same time to be the lead scientist in the program on biological control of weeds. So we worked for several years together, just doing research and traveling the world, looking for beneficial insects that we could bring to Florida to control bad plants or bad insects.
So what's the time period between when you bring these insects, good guys, into the lab till the time that you can release them out into the environment?
It's not a short period of time because it takes quite a while to develop methods to rear these insects, to raise these insects in sufficient numbers to be able to study them. And then we have to develop and design experiments to look at their behavior, their reproductive behavior. What do they eat? What do they do not eat? That is the most important thing. We really want to know how restrictive is their diet. And if there's any indication that an insect that we're looking at for biological control of weeds, any indication that it might attack a crop or a native plant, it's usually discarded right away and no longer studied, and we go find something else. So it takes a long time to really learn how to manage these insects in the laboratory and get all the data to determine how well they do under different temperature regimes, how they do with the different types of other insects and plants that they're exposed to out there in the Florida environment.
So can you give us a couple of examples of some of the insects that you have studied over a long period of time and have released and have been successful for you?
Well, in my program, something that actually began before I joined UF was biological control of Mexican bromeliad weevil. This is a weevil that attacks native bromeliads here in Florida. We have 16 species of native bromeliads here in Florida, and 12 out of the 16 are threatened by this weevil from Mexico and Guatemala. And I discovered a fly down in Honduras that only attacks weevils, grubs in bromeliads. And we brought this into the quarantine facility. We studied it thoroughly and determined that it attacks only weevil grubs in bromeliads. We put together all the data, put together a petition to USDA, and we were approved for release of this fly from the quarantine facility. We began our releases in 2009, and our first release was at a county park near Tampa, just north of Tampa. We released the fly, and it came back a couple of months later to do some monitoring, some scouting to see if the fly was around, and by golly, we detected that the fly was there. And so we proceeded to release the fly in, I think, 8 or 9 other counties here in South Florida. But something has happened, and we have never been able to recover that fly again. Maybe it's the fly just never adapted to the Florida environment, or there are too many other things out there to eat the flies, like frogs and lizards and spiders. We don't know, but we did a lot of releases over 3 or 4 years and never recovered it.
So your research in a lab can seem ideal, but then when you go out and release it into the real world, right? Things are different. Things change. There's other variables and animals out there that can kind of put a halt to your research in a way.
Yeah, the lab environment and the field environment are very, very different. Now, in the weed biocontrol area, Bill did some work with Brazilian pepper and did some exploration. He and his colleagues did some exploration down in Brazil and have found some thrips, very tiny insects, and some psyllids, not even closely related to the psyllid that's a problem in citrus.
Right.
Very, very different from the psyllid that's a pest in citrus. And so he found these psyllids and found these thrips and has been doing a lot of research on those and has found out that those thrips and those psyllids are highly specific to not only the species of Brazilian pepper that's a weed here, but also particular varieties of Brazilian pepper. So we're now waiting for permission from USDA to be able to release those psyllids and those thrips into the Florida environment for control of Brazilian pepper, which is a big, big problem here in South Florida.
Well, yeah, you see Brazilian pepper
Everywhere.
and in a lot of the instances they're controlled mechanically, but at times they're not controlled mechanically properly, so they have a tendency to want to grow back. So,
Exactly.
So the combination between those two.
Yeah.
Now I understand that really your true love though is of beetles, Coleoptera.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I began collecting insects when I was 11-year-old. 4-H project.
Yeah.
I was in 4-H for 4 years, or for 7 years. I'm sorry, and that was my primary project. And when it came time to go to college, I just decided to carry on with insects. And it was in graduate school at Berkeley that I fell in love with beetles and began focusing just on beetles. I've worked with a colleague at the University of Nebraska, Dr. Brett Ratcliffe, on studying the scarab beetles of the New World. These are very large scarabs. Sometimes the males will have very large horns. Mm-hmm. And so we have done a lot of work in Central America, Mexico, the West Indies. We're now wrapping up a book on the scarab beetle, the dynastine scarab beetles of the U.S. and Canada, and we're just now getting going on doing a new one on Ecuador. I maintain my own personal beetle collection, specimens mostly the United States, El Salvador, Central America, and Paraguay, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer. But yeah, beetles to me are extremely fascinating, not just the big ones with horns, but even the little ones. You get them under a scope and you see some of that incredible morphology.
Yeah, you've been kind enough to bring your collection into our 4-H entomology camp. And every time you do, the kids just absolutely go wild and looking at your different specimens. But they do like the large horned big beetles.
Oh, yeah.
I love looking at those. So it was a 4-H club that turned into a hobby, that turned into a career, and so you never know.
Blame it on 4-H.
There you go. That's right. So you, as interim director, now have hired new scientists for the research center. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the work that the new scientists are looking at, who they are, and how that can benefit the community, the agricultural community especially.
Sure. Yeah, we had a number of people, a number of faculty members retire last year. So we've been hiring, trying to replenish our ranks there at IREC. About a year ago, in February of last year, we hired a new plant pathologist, Dr. Liliana Cano, who's a specialist on genomics on informatics. In other words, she goes deep into the organism to look at its DNA, to look at its genetic makeup. And so she's looking at fungi and bacteria that are pathogens of plants, and looking at how, if what she calls effector proteins work, and how those effector proteins might be incorporated in new plant varieties to make those new plant varieties tolerant or resistant to the plant pathogens. So her work is very high tech. It's at the very small molecular level. Most of us who work with whole organisms don't understand it, but she certainly does, and it's exciting work, and she's been recognized nationally and internationally for her very good work. In June, we hired a new horticultural entomologist, Dr. Javad Qureshi. Dr. Qureshi had previously been working at the Southwest Florida REC in Immokalee, where he had years of experience with citrus. So his program is looking at citrus and how growers can manage the pests associated with citrus. But he will also be branching out into other crops such as peaches and maybe into vegetables. Depends on where there's a need. And then we have a new extension person who works closely with you, Dr. Lisa Krimsky, who joined us in July. She's a water resource, regional specialized agent in water resources. So she'll be educating the public on water management and lagoon, health of the Indian River Lagoon and all that. And then in November, we had two new faculty members join us. Dr. Carrie Mintier, who took over Dr. Bill Overholt's program because Dr. Overholt retired last year. So Dr. Carrie Mintier, who's now doing the research and leading the program on weed biological control in the Biological Control Research and Containment Laboratory. And she'll continue to do work on Brazilian pepper, but look at some new weeds also. And then Dr. Roanito Ferrerizzi, who is our new citrus horticulturalist, who's looking at the horticulture of citrus and managing our new research grove and taking over what is called our CUPS project. CUPS is the citrus under protective shelter, so growing specialized citrus under protective shelters to keep the psyllids out so the psyllids can't vector the greening bacterium to them. So it's an exciting time with new faculty. We're actively looking for plant root biologists to look at the subterranean part of the crop, because we have a lot of people looking at the above ground part, but we need somebody to look at the root systems. And we're also actively looking for an ag engineer, somebody who look at precision irrigation.
Yeah, and the precision irrigation is part of the best management practices that are now being mandated by the state in terms of having, precision ag and where you're going to irrigate or where you're going to fertilize. So that's a really important position. Our office, our extension office, has also hired some new faculty. Dr. Garima Kukar, who's going to work with Johnny and some of your other staff. So there's a great connection between research and extension. So you'll do a lot of the research projects, and the extension will help explain that to the farmers and to the community. We have Ken Jueli, who is working closely with Dr. Mintier. So there's a real nice teamwork there as well. So let's talk a little bit about how research and extension can work together, and some of the projects that you see would help the community by taking extension and research and working together.
Well, your extension faculty really should play some role in the research that's going on at IREC, because that's how they'll understand the research and the details of the research, so that they know how it works, what the benefits are, what can be gained from it, so that they can extend that. That's what extension is, extend that to the clientele. So they really got to participate in the research that my faculty is doing there at IREC. But also, most of the faculty at IREC have extension appointments. It's part of their job to run extension programs, and they can't do that in isolation. They need to work with the extension faculty of St. Lucie County and neighboring counties to have the most effective program. So the sharing of activities, the cooperation in extension activities is another key way of our two faculties interacting.
You have some veteran researchers at the station. Let's talk a little bit about the work that they're doing.
Sure. Dr. Sinley Ha is in the Soil and Water Sciences Department. He's a specialist on soil analysis, soil chemistry, and he's also looking at stormwater chemistry. One of the projects he's looking at is as stormwater can be moved into a temporary storage pond where there is a certain type of vegetation, and that vegetation can clean up that water, can pull out a lot of the nutrients from that water before it's then moved on into the lagoon. And so that's really interesting work to see how water comes in, it's just exposed to plants, and when it comes out, it's got a totally different chemistry, much safer for the lagoon.
So will the plants be located in a littoral zone on the edge of a retention area, in a channel, or
throughout that entire retention
so they
pond.
could be submerged as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that is interesting, because that's, of course, everyone knows that's a huge issue here along the Treasure Coast, is stormwater runoff, the quality of that runoff before it is released, and so yeah, there's a lot of work that's going on with that.
He also has what is called a core laboratory, where he can do all sorts of soil analyses to get an idea of nitrogen content, phosphorus content, other element content, the basic soil analysis that growers need to be able to know how to better prepare their soil for best management practices. So this core laboratory is very critical to servicing this area of the state for the growers. We also have Dr. Alan Wright, who is in the same department, Soil and Water Sciences. Dr. Wright has really two quite different programs. He's looking at plant nutrition, fertilization for citrus and vegetables, focusing right now on citrus. He's been with us for a couple of 3 years. He came from the Everglades Research and Education Center in Belglade. And so he's looking at fertilization rates and what best fertilizers there are, and plant nutrition, in other words. But he's also looking at the quality of the soils and water in protected area, well, not protected areas, but native areas, non-agricultural areas, to see what sort of contamination is coming in, and how is that water being managed, or how is that water being changed when it comes into these native areas. So looking at phosphorus content and nitrogen content in these areas that are not used for agriculture.
But we're not the only research station here in the state. There's a number of them located throughout the state. So do you have that number? Am I putting you on the spot here?
13, I believe it is.
Yeah, I think that's what I had heard.
I think it's 13 other research and education centers. There's one down in Homestead, the Tropical REC. There's one in Fort Lauderdale REC. They focus a lot on urban pests. They have a world-renowned specialist in termites down there. And they've got actually 2 people down there who work on termites, but they have other people who work on other urban pests. And they also have specialists in palm trees and palms down there.
Yeah, Dr. Monica and Elliot and I work pretty closely together. She's taught me quite a bit, and especially in urban areas of palm management. And then down further, we have Dr. Mannion, who works with the
She's at the Tropical Rec and
Tropical.
Homestead. Hmm.
and then we have the center up in Vero, the medical entomology lab up there, which is really
Florida
kind of
Medical
different
Entomology
than
Lab.
what some of the traditional RECs are.
Yeah, it's not called an REC,
Yeah.
but in concept it is, because it's got faculty from the Department of Entomology and Nematology, and all those people are looking at medical issues, primarily mosquitoes, because that is the big medical issue here as far as insects in Florida. So they look at mosquito biology, mosquito genetics, mosquito physiology, epidemiology of things like Zika virus and dengue, and but I don't think any of those faculty are involved in teaching courses like we are.
No.
Some of them are involved in extension, so they are essentially a research and an education center. They're just not called that, but they're still considered an REC.
So your center also does some satellite teaching, and I know you've invited me in for a couple of those classes, and I appreciate that. So in the last couple of minutes, why don't we talk about some of the teaching that's going on out of your center and how that's being accomplished?
Sure. We used to have a much larger teaching program. In fact, we used to teach courses live there at the center. I used to teach an entomology course live to students there, and a former faculty member, Sandy Wilson, used to teach horticulture, environmental horticulture classes there live. But it's a new age, and now the University of Florida has a new online, UF
Yeah.
online program where degrees can be had online without even being in the state of Florida. So some of these courses now are being reformatted to an online format. For example, my plant pest management, fundamentals of plant pest management course. I used to teach it live, but now it's totally online, and unfortunately I never meet the students. I'll have students mostly here in Florida, but I'm teaching that course now, and I've got students in Tennessee. I'll have students in Texas. I'll have students in California. A few years ago, I had a student in Afghanistan. He was a soldier in Afghanistan at a military base, and one time he didn't take the exam. He just didn't take the exam, and then about 2 weeks after the exam, he wrote and said, "Sorry, we lost communication. We lost our internet service because our base was bombarded."
Oh my, yeah.
And so, yeah, all sorts of things. So we have Dr. Ha Senli Ha teaches courses on soils, all online, and Dr. Cano, Liliana Cano, is teaching a course on plant pathology online. So it's better for us because we don't have access to all of the student body that they have in Gainesville, but we need to reach out to students who are not just in Gainesville, but throughout Florida and the United States and the world.
Well, I'm going to have to cut you off here. We're running out of time, but Dr. Cave, I want to thank you for being with us today, and I want to thank the audience for watching us. Thank you.